Hey guys, welcome, and thanks for joining me today in the studio. What we're going to be talking about today is if you have a grinder like this, it's maybe considered a doserless grinder. In other words, it does not have the large reservoir on the front where the coffee is stored and you pull a lever to dose that. That's considered a doser type grinder. This is a doserless grinder, and there are many variations of this grinder, but most of them run off of time. And so you're going to have a programmable amount of time that you're going to set, and that will dose a certain amount of coffee based on the grind and other factors such as the weather and things that may need to be altered. But that's not really what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about what you would do if maybe, say, one time you go to run it and nothing comes out. You press the button, the activation button to get it to grind, and it just maybe makes a funny noise or doesn't do anything, or you don't hear it doing anything, but maybe the counter is running down but no coffee is coming out. The main cause for this is usually you either have worn out burrs, which we'll talk about burrs in a second, but you either have worn out burrs and need replacement burrs. If they've been recently serviced, then it's possible that the grinder has been adjusted too fine. And the reason that adjusting it too fine is a problem is that with the doserless grinder in particular, you have a longer chute that comes from your grind chamber, which I will also go over in a second here. But you have a small size, longer chute that comes from the grind chamber and brings coffee down into where it's actually dispensed into your portafilter down here below. If it's ground really, really fine, that coffee's going to pack up in there, and it's actually going to create a blockage to where nothing can get out. When that gets to a certain point, backing up into the grinder, then the grinder can no longer rotate because it's just filling up and locking up. It can't push through that anymore. And the burrs are directional so that it will actually throw the coffee out of the grinder chamber. And if it can't throw them anywhere, then it builds up inside there, and then it just totally locks up. And then you're stuck with that situation that I discussed. So the first thing to check would be, when the burrs were done. Generally, with a normal stand every 6 months is traditional. If they've been done in the last month or 2 months, then the first thing to do when it locks up is to back your adjustment knob off. Some of them are more picky than others. Some of them, the adjustment is like a micro adjustment. And so you may need to turn it a bunch of times, but you're going to need to go towards coarse. And almost every grinder will show you how to do that. On this one in particular, you have to actually remove this little piece. This is a Rancilio. You have to remove this little piece, and you'll see, you probably can't see it on the camera, but down here there's a series of dots, and they go small, a little bit larger, a little bit larger, large. And what that's telling me is that if I rotate it towards the large, so if I turn this clockwise, the chunks of coffee are going to get bigger. A lot of grinders will tell you either with little dots, so like this one. Some of them will tell you coarse rotation this way. You may have a large collar that you need to adjust. Some of them have locking pins. There's so many different grinders, it's nearly impossible for me to cover all of them, but what you're going to want to do is, however your grinder is adjusted, you're going to want to go towards coarse. And you're going to turn it on, activate it like you're going to try to grind coffee, and then you're going to turn it towards coarse. And just keep going, and pretty soon you'll probably hear it let go, and it'll start grinding again. And you may get a big of coffee come out of the doser, and that's clearing your blockage. Then what you're going to want to do after that is start adjusting it back down fine again. But anytime you adjust a grinder, any grinder, but especially doserless grinders, you're going to want to adjust it finer while it is dosing coffee. And I will explain why that is in just a second here. But you always want to adjust any grinder. If you're going to go finer, make sure it's running and coffee is coming out, and then you start cranking it down. You can go coarser, and I will also explain why that is. But you can go coarser without it running, but always the other way around, make sure it's running. That's hugely important. That gets a lot of people into a lot of trouble, and most people don't know that. It's not in the manual. Nobody will tell you, but that's really important. So if we look over here at the diagram, I'm going to bring this a little bit closer so you can see it. So if we look right here, this is a burr, and there's going to be two of these in here. And it's a round piece of steel, and it has all these little angled teeth cut into it. And that's going to be, there's going to be one right here. This is the body of your grinder, and this is the hopper. Here's your motor. That's basically just a big motor inside. Let me move that over a little bit. And there's going to be a burr on a burr carrier here, and then there's another burr that is attached to a collar. That collar is what you're going to adjust. One way or another, you're going to be raising or lowering that collar. And what that's going to do is that's going to close the gap between these two burrs, or it's going to increase the gap between the two burrs. Increasing it, obviously, making that gap bigger, the little pieces of coffee you have coming out from it being ground between the two burrs, they're going to be larger. You make that gap smaller, they're going to be smaller. So what happens when you plug it, let's say that you didn't have it running when you were adjusting it, and this collar comes down, and you squeeze the coffee beans between the two, it's locked. It can't rotate. So this bottom one is the only one that rotates. The other one is rigid. So you're trying to rotate this loose burr with coffee in direct contact to this burr. Well, very few grinders are strong enough to break through that solid coffee. They're just going to lock up and they won't do anything. It'll just stick there and it'll make a humming noise. It won't do anything. So that's why what we're going to do is we're going to back that off, increase the gap, give it some room to breathe, let it go, and then we'll bring it down. Well, if it's grinding, when you're bringing it down to a smaller gap, then it's going to cut the pieces smaller and smaller, and there will never be like whole beans or large chunks in there that you're just squeezing. You'll always be cutting it down to what it's used to running at, and it'll run just fine. And those burrs do need to be replaced because all those little teeth get dull eventually, and then they can't cut anymore, just like a steak knife. Or any cutting knife. Once it gets dull, it can't cut anymore. So, just show you really quick what I'm talking about. You can actually see, if you look down in there, there's a burr, the outer ring. This is the top part of that carrier in there that holds the burr, and that's the part that rotates. There's a whole carrier in there. You might be able to see the teeth. You can just kind of catch the edge of the teeth there. Camera doesn't want to focus on it. But anyway, so that's what we're looking at. So that's always the first thing to do. Check and see if the burrs have been replaced recently. Check and see if you need to adjust that courser to get it going again. Then you can tweak it down from there. Other than that, there's really not a whole lot of causes for that to go wrong. The other thing that you can do is you can remove this hopper, and you can take a vacuum and suck out whatever you can get down through this, but you're not going to be able to pull, if the beans are wedged in there, you're not going to be able to pull them out with just a vacuum. So you're going to need to back it off no matter what. But you can clean out what's in there, and that will kind of help. Now on some grinders, if we're talking about like the Marzocco Swift, maybe like the Madcap MXD, you can put like a pipe cleaner or even a straw. If you have a straw, you can stick that up the chute and kind of clean out the blockage. The Swift comes with a clean out rod, and on the side of the tower they have little doors that flip up and you can stick the clean out rod in there and break it up. I don't know of any other grinders that do that. You have to be really careful with like the Simonelli Mythos. The Simonelli Mythos, if you stick something up there, you're going to wreck there's a little plastic clump buster that kind of looks like this, and as the coffee goes through, it breaks up the clumps and causes it to come out smoother rather than, you know, being in big clumps, chunks. The Maycaps, they all have a metal one of those, so you're not going to damage the grinder, but you might get a piece of straw stuck in there or something, which is also not good. So just be real careful with that. Sticking things into the grinder, generally not a good idea, but if you're real careful, and if you have the type of grinder that maybe doesn't have a clump buster, or you know what type it does have, then you may be fine. Beyond that pretty much, I would say probably 95% of the time, this is going to take care of your problem. Backing it off, getting it going again, then cranking it down, that should take care of it. If you do go to crank it back down and you're getting the correct grind, but then it ends up plugging again, then you either need new burrs or maybe there's something wrong with the grinder. Could be like well, there could be some other things. There can be switch issues and capacitor issues and things like that. But this is definitely where you want to start, and then go from there. Adjust it back down, see if you're getting consistent results. The other thing that I would mention too with doserless grinders, whenever you go to adjust one, you want to, and this kind of varies a little bit depending on the grinder, you want to throw out at least one set of shots after you make the adjustment. So you're going to make the adjust, and I'm not talking about after we've plugged it up and we're backing it off. That's totally different. But when you're going towards finer and you're trying to dial in your adjustment, you always want to throw the first set away. And even if you're fine-tuning it up, you still want to throw the first set away, because you're going to have some of the old coffee in that chute. And that's going to be the old adjustment mixed with some of the new adjustment. So you're not going to know, and you may think, well, that's still, it's like halfway there, but it's not all the way there. Well, it's halfway there because it's half your new adjustment, half the old adjustment. So you want to dump that out, get another one, then run it in the machine, try it from there. That's often what gets people into this mess of having the grinder stuck, is that they just kept going finer, 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 finer. All of a sudden, boom, it's way too fine, and it plugs up. So that's a little tip as far as adjusting the grind, and I'm probably going to make another video on adjusting grind, because that needs to have its own video. But I only mentioned that because this is often what gets people into this mess. If you look at like the Simonelli Mythos, the burr chamber is like right at where the coffee comes out. So you really don't have as much of an issue with that. I would throw one set away, go for the next set. A Swift grinder, because it has a long chute, it has the tower, it has the whole doser assembly, you have a lot of that old grind in there. I have often thrown at least 2, sometimes 3 sets, and we're talking like a set of doubles. Throw them away before you fully get that adjustment. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing your tail. So you're going to be a little too much this way, a little too much this way, a little too much this way, and constantly be going back and forth. You're never going to get that sweet spot that you want to, because you're going past and back and past and back and past and back. So that's definitely a key. Something like this Ranchilio, I'd say like 1 set, a Madcap 1 set, Mythos usually 1 set, just because you have less in there. The Swift is an unusual grinder, so it has its own little idiosyncrasies. Definitely something that you need to really learn how to set a Swift. Adjusting a Swift, once most of it is set up, it's pretty straightforward as far as adjusting the grind, because it will always dose correctly and it will always set the correct amount without you needing to do much adjustment. I apologize for my phone. But as far as dumping them out, that is going to be more crucial on dumping them out. So on that note, I believe that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thanks again for joining me in the studio. I hope this really helps. And you can always ask a question if you need to. If I haven't covered something, let me know, and I'll try to make an addendum or edit the video. But that pretty much, I think, should cover it. So have a great one. We'll see you next time.